Welcome to Still Loading. I'm Abdu Al Hadithi. This is the podcast where people who work in marketing and e-commerce tell the truth about what it actually takes. The stuff that doesn't make it onto the case study, the LinkedIn post, or the highlight reel. Today's guest spent over 20 years in marketing across some of the biggest brands in the UK, from Sky and Discovery to Standard Life and Aberdeen. He's launched TV channels, built brand strategies for FTSE 100 businesses, helped land an Andy Murray sponsorship deal, and created a positioning line for Sky that's still running 18 years later. He's worked in media, financial services, and now runs his own independent consultancy, which tells you either that he's incredibly versatile or that he just can't sit still, possibly both. He's based in Edinburgh. He knows brand marketing as well as almost anyone I've come across, and I'm genuinely looking forward to hearing the version of his story that didn't make it onto the CV. Stephen Doherty, welcome to Still Loading.
Thank you very much for having me. This is great.
And as always, we start the same way. Stephen, what was your first click?
Right, so I think first click, right? So you say click, and I'm thinking attribution. It was a funny one because it was an opportunity to join Sky, right? So I had a cousin, and I knew her little brothers really well. Hadn't seen her for years. She was a bit older, and she had this job in London, so I never saw her because I was up in Scotland. And she said, we're about to relaunch a product. They need a dog's body to come in and do anything. And I'm up in Edinburgh and working in retail. And would you come in? Or so would you be interested in like applying or me putting your name forward? And he said, you get two choices. We can fly you down for an interview, or we can fly you down for the job. But that's it. So I said, well, I'll do the phone interview. Hopefully I get it and you can fly me down for the job. And I went down there for 2 months, open-ended, no brief, just come and help us. That was it. I had a marketing degree. I was really keen to work with Sky. I'd worked with them in the call centre to pay my way through uni. But I was sort of going in cold. So my first click was it was a huge opportunity via a family network that I wasn't pressing on. But it was like a big risk, and I was like, I've just got to give this a go and drop everything and try and get out of my job in 4 weeks and 3 weeks and find accommodation in London and just do it.
Straight into the deep end, really. And at such a massive organisation, this was at Sky, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think they were in an interesting stage of maturity. So they were about to become the big Sky that you know now, that's subsequently been bought by Comcast. But there was no juniors there. I was the only person. There was no grad program. I felt especially young, especially Scottish. And it was a really interesting time. I think the company was in a huge growth phase. And it was just before James Murdoch joined, and they really went for sort of massive growth. So in hindsight, it was a really fruitful place to learn. At the time it was really hard. And I think that's the bit that's never going to be in the CV. It was difficult. You would feel like you're maybe, why don't I get this, or what am I not getting? But you look back and it was probably more significant than my degree was my sort of time at that company.
It's the life lessons that resonate the most, isn't it?
Definitely.
And that's a really nice segue into, so Sky wasn't as big then as it is today. And you played a part in growing Sky Plus from 80,000 to 1 million subscribers. It's quite a fascinating scale of growth. But the angle that I want us to touch on is, what did the unglamorous reality of delivering that growth look like?
Yeah. It was super unglamorous, but to me it was really glamorous because it was so fast paced. So I tell you what's really interesting for me in looking at where we are now and where marketing is now. So now I went in, and my job, so we were doing direct marketing. So what's the difference is that was sending out things to your house. So you're a subscriber of Sky, we want to sell you this product, we would like you to buy it. We would send you a card or a flyer or a pack, depending what segment you fell into. And my job was to pull, or part of my job was to pull the data. So it was to, and actually when you look back, it was segmentation, it was post-campaign analysis, it was prioritization. And I was just thrown into the deep end of doing it. And the guy that actually pulled the data for me was still a really good friend, and sort of saw him a couple of years ago. We went on holiday with them. But I just thought, right, that's how you do it. And then I've sort of been in there, so you'd go in, so we would be pulling, data, and you'd have to wait till people were contactable, and you'd literally be pulling data minute by minute to go, right, we've hit the contact rules, we've now got it up to the level that pays for the mailing. So it was really high pressure because you're having to do things correctly, but you needed to hit your numbers and you needed to get to the volume, and the volume of growth that they needed big campaigns. We were mailing millions of people, and this was on a base of 7 million, 2-3 million people in some campaigns over a month. So, the unglamorous side would be, signing off physical proofs and doing it at all hours. And, actually, I don't think it's unglamorous because I quite liked it, but people would see it wasn't the London, the bit that wasn't the London ad agency side of it was getting to the printers, signing off proofs, physically doing it, phoning phone numbers to check them because that's your call to action back then. We did a lot of e-commerce testing then, which was successful, but the market was all phone-based sales at that time. So yeah, the scale and the work that was involved was not the sort of more glamorous side of advertising. But for me, I really enjoyed it because if you're pulling the data and you send it out to the base and then you're going, who bought it? And you've got all that within the business. Nobody talked about it as data at the time, but that's what it was, and it was measurement, and it was attribution and analysis.
You just didn't call it those, you just didn't
Yeah,
give them those terms of
you
attribution.
have the labels. So you sort of go like, I was going like, right, I'm pulling the data. We need the data to send the things out in the post. We need the addresses. We need to then go, how are the hot leads doing? How are the warm leads doing? How are the cold leads doing? Which one's performing? And none of the labels that we use now, that language just hadn't evolved to go, okay, well, what's our post-campaign analysis? All of that. So we were doing it, but just in a very organic kind of way. And it really hit home because after about 6 months, a company called dunnhumby came in, and they were the pioneers of like customer data. And they did a talk in our big, there's like a big sort of viewing theatre at Sky. It was a TV company, and they come in and they're like, "We're going to talk to you about segmentation." And I'm sort of going, "Well, that's what we've been doing." And they were pitching the concept of data and segmentation of your base to the marketing department, to like the heads, and I'm sure they all knew it to a certain level, but I was sort of sitting there going, "Oh, I thought you guys all knew this and you were all doing it," and because that's what I've been doing, and you've had me doing for 6 months and teaching me and helping me understand it, but actually realizing that even though you were doing it, that was still really at the front end of the discipline, and it was new not just to me as a sort of 23-year-old, but it was new to the business. That idea of cutting up your base, prioritizing your leads, measuring it, tailoring creative to suit, profiles and what people watch. So, yeah.
So there's an element of personalization there as well as all the things, but just not
Yeah.
called what it is right now.
Not at all, no. And it's the same principles, isn't it? It's like, so what do we know about you? What's your propensity to buy? What message should we serve you? What channel should we do it in? When do we get it to you? And did you buy the thing? And if you did, how much did you pay for it? And as your revenue, because the great thing about Sky is it's really stuck with me over time. Is everyone had the same KPI, and it was, or same two KPIs, right? The whole business had it, and it was what you would call, well, it was average revenue per user. So how much everybody was spending on subscription services and products and so on, and the volume of subscribers we had. So whether you worked in the call center, whether you worked in marketing, or whether you were like a TV presenter, you were all doing well if those numbers were doing well, and we were all not doing well if they weren't. And that's, in hindsight, that's amazing because it galvanizes you. So you all know you're working to the same goal.
Something else that you've created that still lasts until today is Believe in Better, which is still running 18 years after you've created that slogan. What does it feel like when something that you've made completely outlives your time there? Does it feel like legacy, or is it sort of something a bit stranger than that?
Well, it opens up a great point on attribution, because I think if you have a certain type of way of thinking, you'll realise that in a big company, really is a shared endeavour. And you're part of a team working to a goal. There'll be lots of sports analogies that other people could bring in better than me. But you work hard, you play your role, and we get to that goal. And I think the thing about longevity is I look at that in a different way and I go, that's a really strong business and a really headstrong business that have had. They haven't had too much leadership change, but what I've realised over time is there are more brand changes triggered by people changes than by customers or by the market or by opportunity in the more rational, logical, strategic pieces. It tends to be a bit of new person, new manager, shake up the team, whatever. So I love talking about that still going strong today. It's almost a measure of that business and going like, I was a small person, I was a brand manager, I was the only brand manager there at the time. So it was a relatively unique and significant role, but very, very, very small fry. But for the business to stick with the name, the positioning, the visual codes, the distinctive brand assets and that line and still be using it even after being bought by Comcast, whatever that was, like 3-4 years ago, that's really impressive because there's people around that table going, I might want something different, but this is good enough, this has value, this has resonance, this is measurable, it's stretchable. I'm sort of like impressed by the fact they've stuck to it because you've got no control once you leave somewhere, once you move on. I didn't really keep much control at the time. You can try and influence, but so I think it's great because I like using it when I'm working with people on how they might talk about their attributes or position their business or talk about what makes them interesting and go, stick to it. The biggest challenge in all sort of marketing and brand in many ways is just having the guts to stick with it long term. And we've got a real culture of switching out things quickly in lots of ways. We have it like prime ministers now, which is bizarre. So to stick with something, well done. I look at any business that sticks with something and go, that's harder than changing it.
And I want to double click into something you mentioned on a couple of occasions. So you were an early adopter of a lot of those marketing metrics that didn't have a name at the time, but now have a name. But you were also one of the first advertisers on Spotify, and you created Discovery's first iPhone app.
Yeah.
What I want to double click into here is, what was the atmosphere around digital at the time? Was it exciting, or did people have, resistance towards it?
Yeah, it was a really, the parallels with now are so strong because, and I think you actually had a lot more honesty back then. So we were thinking sort of 2008 to 2010. Platforms were new. Spotify at the time was ripping low quality CDs and putting them up for streaming. That was a really basic affair. Media companies weren't sure what was happening. There was a threat to orthodoxy, and people didn't know whether to, from a marketing point of view, invest in the website, in the build, which at the time was incredibly expensive to build any interesting functionality, particularly for a media company online. So people didn't know. And you would have people making binary calls, but the answer's always in, it's trying, isn't it? And having a sort of a goal and having a bit of space to test and learn. So when I moved to Discovery, it was the first time I had a media budget. And the media budgets were very interesting there. They were sizable, but they were short term because it was for TV programmes. So we want you to watch a TV programme. We need you getting in at episode 1 or 2 or you're not following the series. And then we need that. We need you to follow through the series to have the value to sell the media to advertisers. So commercially, it's a really, I should do it that direction, it's a spike, right? So you've got like a 2-week campaign to launch and get people into watching a programme, and you maybe got like £500,000 in 2009. That's a lot, that's a good enough budget. It's not sky level, but it's a lot bigger than most people's annual budgets. So what I was keen to do is to go, look, well, if we've got all this money and we've got a lot of it, and a Daily Mail placement's going to cost 10% of our budget already. Have to go to Daily Mail because they've got the largest ABC One volume. So certain bits, your targets and your commercials tend to write themselves. And what I said to our VP is that could we carve out maybe 10% of the budget for testing and for new media and new formats? And he was like, yeah, I'd be really open to that. Because for the price of an extra day in the big newspapers or an extra outdoor placement, We could try Spotify. We could try pre-roll VOD advertising. Like we're one of the first that were doing that on Channel 4 streaming, and try these new channels because they represented real targeting opportunities, because they could be really micro, really niche on audience profiles, and the cost was quite low as well. So it was a sort of, you would, as long as you didn't have a sort of, if people weren't buying media on vanity, because there's a lot of media buys that go, we want to be seen in that space. And there's strategy to that as well. We're going, let's try something new, let's try this Spotify thing. And it meant, we could make really interesting integrated campaigns where we're not saying the same thing everywhere. We go, Spotify, what's cool about that? Right, we're between songs, so we've got to make this entertaining. It's got to feel like a little TV program on 30 seconds, not going, watch this program. It's on at 9 o'clock on, channel 401 or whatever. So it was really good fun, but you wouldn't go anywhere without the sort of the leadership buy-in to go, do you have the confidence to sort of put 10% of your budget to new media?
And that's really interesting because everyone talks about building a fail fast culture, particularly today where you have the capability to A/B test and build out learnings quite quickly.
Yeah.
You still get a huge amount of resistance in the modern day when you can switch up things in a website within 20, 30 seconds. So to have some openness to setting aside 10% of your budget for tests and learn when a mistake or something that doesn't work is a lot more difficult to change and adapt versus now. How did you go about persuading the stakeholders? Was it a simple conversation of, I want 10%, go for it? Or was there a bit of back and forth and some persuasion that you had to do?
I think it was, when I joined, there was a real push to do integrated marketing for the first time. So we had, you do promotions on your own channels, you had a PR department, you had a marketing department. They were all really good, but doing it separately. And I was part of the team coming together, and I was like a sort of a virtual project manager, pulling together the different departments and stakeholders and the programming team and research. So we had this really, really, really nice collaborative environment where we had lots of, suddenly a campaign wasn't doing a TV ad, doing a press ad, doing a cinema ad, doing an out of home. We had all of the bits of the campaign mixed through, from the customer insight to the measurement to the programming. Everybody was sort of literally round the table. So within that, it felt a much safe. It's weird, sort of, as the thing got bigger and more complex, so as you could argue it's easier to hide things, it made things more interesting. And I think culturally we were just more open to doing different things because there was a culture of let's focus on effectiveness and let's do more on measurement. And because we're being more deliberate about our creative processes and our campaign processes and the integration of them, then we've actually created enough latitude to go, and we can now sort of try different creative and media, because media is only one part of it. It's actually using it properly. And that's the bit I really learned when I worked with that team, is what you tend to find if you've got these big integrated campaigns or you're doing the testing is they go, right, we've got this new media, but we'll just run the same ad. Whereas actually you need to build the creative and the ads to suit the media format, which brings another layer of cost and another layer of risk and another layer of time. But the bit that business was very good at going, it doesn't need to be the same ad everywhere. We'll make something that is really good in people's ears on this new streaming thing.
And it's interesting because that resistance wasn't limited by time. There still tends to be a bit of resistance towards digital marketing. So you have what we might call, or my generation might call, the old school marketing that operates in the realms of what we'd call old school marketing, and probably superimpose some of the old school marketing principles into digital marketing, even when it comes to the metrics and what you measure and what is important versus what isn't too important. And then they might struggle to get their heads around modern day measurement and marketing effectiveness and what that really means and how do you measure that. And then you've got the generation of digital marketers to whom it's second nature. They might get frustrated if they have to over explain things. And now you have a new generation emerging who are very well versed in AI and believe that AI can do absolutely everything. So there's almost a melting pot of three different types of generations mixing in one era right now. in the space of the last 2 or so years, and then that will carry on over the next
Yeah.
5 years. Do you think that all three generations can genuinely coexist inside of a single brand, or should businesses eventually pick a lane and go with it?
No, I think you have to, right? I think there's part of this. You're right that it's generational, right? What are you native to? What were you native to? But I think it's a mindset thing because you sort of go and look. If there's a set of tools out there, you got to work out what should be in your stack, to use a modern terminology. And I think there was a period, maybe 5-6 years ago, where like the size of the stack was like, have you seen how many different bits we've got in our stack? Look at how big our stack is.
And now they
And then there
consolidate.
was like, and everyone's like, have you seen we've got everything in one box? And you're like, the answer's not one or the other. It's like, what do you need to do? Who's it for? Where are your audiences? What do we need to do it? Right? And you got to like, if you don't know your customers, you'll never answer this, and it becomes an internal thing. The bit that interests me is having all those three people round the table and us all learning and listening to each other. And I think there's more for I probably fall right between two generations of marketer before the sort of when digital departments were being created, but in the days where budgets were still quite constrained and you had to justify more and you didn't have endless sort of outdoor media budgets and so on. So sort of there's a real sort of between two stools, or between 2 points in time. But I think all of it, you've got to be interested in like, okay, how can all of this work together? What do we need to know? Where can this help us? Where do we need to be careful? Yeah.
Yeah, it probably goes down to attribution modeling, but just building on the point you mentioned, there was a Forrester stat that I read around 2003, maybe 2004, something along the lines of 75% of CMOs stated they were confident with the tech stack that they have pulled together and
Yeah.
invested in all the right places. But the overwhelming majority, I think 2/3 of those CMOs who felt ready and had the right tech stack, 2/3 of them were worried that they don't have the right strategy in place to utilize that tech
Yeah.
stack to its fullest potential. And yeah, there was a trigger happy few years where everyone was all about tech stack, martech, and data tech, and
Yeah.
get everything out there. That looks really cool. Let's implement it and see what happens, and that will improve our targeting and personalization. But without the underlying principles, the strategy, the direction, there isn't. Every machine is operating in its own little silo, and you're creating more problems than you're actually solving. But then the next sort of segue, I suppose, is you moved from media and made quite a
Yeah.
drastic move. So you went from media to financial services,
Yeah.
Standard Life and Aberdeen. Suddenly you're operating in a very highly regulated, very complex environment after years in fast moving media. What did you have to unlearn to make that transition work?
Yeah, I think the biggest change was like it was like cultural. It was quite a funny one because you sort of there's pragmatism. So if you look at where are the marketing budgets and the large marketing teams in Edinburgh, so I'd moved from London to Edinburgh, to a lesser extent Glasgow, they tend to be around professional services and financial services in this area. So I'd moved up I'd worked in a media job in Glasgow for a bit and then took a break and went, I'll look for an opportunity, a sort of easy next opportunity. And Standard Life came up. They just completed a rebrand. And I had this sort of mad thing because you sort of go in and it's just realising how massively culturally different industries can be because it's a bit like, let's use this sort of classic Pareto sort of 80-20 split. In my time in media, I would say 80% of the marketing budget was on activity and 20% was on the team. But I think in the regulated sectors, it was like the opposite, where you sort of go, there was a huge amount of people and a really small amount of media spend.
Yeah.
Now, that's not because these businesses are stupid, but it's actually because there's so much detail, regulation, so many people to cover stuff that once you get through spending on all of that and all the literature and documentation and regulatory stuff you've got to do, there's not a huge amount left at the end.
Yeah.
And then you're operating in a market, to your point on attribution, where these aren't quick sales. Nobody goes out and sort of just snappily buys a pension or
Yeah.
an investment product or changes a fund or whatever. So, but then that creates a totally different culture of performance management, what good looks like, how campaigns are developed, and so on as well. And it took me ages, and I think it was only like by year 8 of my sort of 12 or 13 that I started to sort of really get it, because I just kept going. I was used to being like, yeah, we're spending on growth, brand, sales activation, media. I'd had 10 odd years of that was the norm. That's how we grow our business. That's where our revenue goes straight into investment in marketing. Whereas actually in these businesses, you had to make the case for it and really fight. And actually, there's a lot to be said in that. Having to go in with a, let's talk about it simply as like a zero-based budgeting model. So you've got no budget. You have as much. Speaking to somebody recently, and they said, I say to my people, you can have as much budget as you want. You just need to pitch for it and show what I'm going to get for it. And I think there's something in that. There's in that way of doing it. But yeah, it was a big shift, and also the fact that concepts like brand strategy and planning just weren't in the mix there.
It must have been quite a difficult transition, because in media, you can pretty much measure, or it would have been a lot easier to measure the impact of what you've done and attribute some revenue to the spend. Whereas with longer lead times in such a heavily regulated industry, I would imagine it's a lot more difficult to attribute revenue to this. And then you potentially have the problem, the typical finance director problem of the space of about 5 to 7 years, every marketer used to go to an FD and say, we need more marketing budget. We've spent 200,000 last month and we've driven X million impressions. And so what does impressions mean? It means there was eyeballs on the brand all of these people saw the billboard, they would have engaged with it. And you have that conversation around, you go to the football stadium, you see a McDonald's billboard, and then when you get hungry on the way back, you might go and buy McDonald's. And that was as close to an attribution model at the time. What did it look like in the financial sector for you? How did you quantify what you'd done and therefore get more budget?
So the interesting one for me, so the bit I can talk directly about, and this is funny because when we talk about attribution, this is something that I really wanted to try, and we did it, and it worked well. So, sales journey attribution, we could pick up points. There'd be people within that business who are far better to talk about it and were much closer to it than me. The one bit I encountered, right, so I hadn't heard of Standard Life when I joined, and I wasn't a finance person and didn't have any savings or pensions or whatever. It's still pretty young. Well, you should have, but you learn this as you move into these industries and go, oh, okay, right, that makes sense. Anyway, but what I encountered was the brand. So this was a brand that had been around for, like well over 100 years. It was like it'd been a private company, became a FTSE company. It was a FTSE 100. It was massive. It had 4 million customers. Like, it's a big business, thousands of employees globally. You go into one room and the brand would be great. We don't need to spend any money. We've got a great brand. And then you go into another room with another person who's an agitator, and they go, the brand's rubbish. We need to start again. We need to change everything. But there was never any quantification, never any data behind it. It was your opinion versus my opinion. That's like, there's got to be an answer to this. But the problem we had is there was no brand tracking had been in place. So we had no data, no insight, no measurement on it. And if you've ever done a brand tracking, it's like, if you're doing a bespoke one, you need to wait 18 months before you've got a benchmark and you've got changes and all of that. And we're like, we need to find answers quick. And so I went out to market and I spoke to YouGov, and they've got this product called Brand Index. And what they do is they track a number of brands in a number of sectors anyway. And they sell, at the time, like this was maybe sort of 7 years ago, they would sell that data to people via subscription to a platform. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is excellent. So you've been tracking our brands for X number of years. Great. So I invested in that platform, and I put all my budget, which was actually quite tiny, well, relatively tiny, into that. And I just sweated that platform for the insights. And what we found out quite quickly is 4 out of 5 people in the target market had heard of the brand. That's amazing.
Wow.
Like, that's huge. Like, have you, you are somebody who fits into, you could invest in a pension, you might have disposable savings, you might have an ISA, a relatively high net worth but high volume, grouping. 4 out of 5 have heard of it in the target market. That's huge. And then we're going like, what do you know about it? And less than 20% of people had an opinion or a view on it. So I took that insight to the CMO, who was actually, I was in like a not in their team, but I was like, I found this really interesting thing. Loads of people have heard of you, but nobody knows what you're about. So your job isn't, I don't think the job is to raise awareness, it's to create meaning. And the good thing is nobody thinks bad of you. They just don't think good of you. Nobody has any view. And we had a really good conversation. She said, great, could you present that to the CEO and take us through it? And we're like, it's like there's a lot of latent value here. The data shows, people have heard of you. They have a low opinion of you, your competitors, and I was able to do a bit of Nielsen analysis. Go, look, here's competitor X, they're growing, they're spending. You don't need to do what they're doing, you need to do something different. And that triggered a sort of, a good 7-figure investment in the brand building and repositioning of that brand that is now going strong today and subsequently being bought and sold and is doing very well. And I think my role in that, on your attribution point, was to highlight what was in the data, and that set in motion a train of events where the CMO then had a really good opportunity to pitch for investment and did a brilliant job of it. And they really reinvigorated that brand, and it's doing great. You'll see it on TV now. I'm not going to be on this podcast going, that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But actually, from an attribution point of view, I don't think you would have got over the line without going, actually, you're in quite an interesting position here, where the really expensive stuff you don't need to do, the really hard stuff you do need to do, and they did a good job of it.
Another really good story that I'd love to hear from you. Obviously, Wimbledon was only a week ago, so we can't exactly move past this. The Andy Murray sponsorship deal, how did that actually happen? And what I'd love for you to double down on is, tell me a part of that story that nobody knows.
Yeah, the bit that interests me is really going to be a really dull bit. So, but I think it's really, really meaningful for anyone looking at sponsorships or partnerships. So I worked for Standard Life. They had an investment company called Standard Life Investments. They were very successful. They had a really strong product in market. So they took, they invested their revenue in being the first global sponsor of the Ryder Cup. So there was suddenly, an appetite and a sort of a headwind for sponsorship in the business. But what was interesting is we had a business called Standard Life, we had one called Standard Life Wealth, one called Standard Life Investments. I think, any research would say, and any logical common sense would say, it's all Standard Life. So everything, whether you've got a distinct business unit selling funds, it's all builds off the equity of Standard Life, and there would be very different positionings and treatments, but it's all coming off that thing. So what I was interested in doing with my head of brand and our sort of global communications director is going, how do we avoid limiting this to just one part of the business? Because actually they're all quite similar. So what we managed to do in that deal is we structured it at a group level. So there's an area of brand that is, quite geeky but massively important, particularly in the digital space, called brand architecture. And it's how you organise your products and services and how you name the brands. And what we were keen to try and do is to be really smart with it and go, we will position this at a group level, at a PLC, so every bit of the business can use it as they want to do. And we did it, and we set it up in the right way. Because when you're doing strategy on things or helping out with the strategy on things, it's about setting it up. You can't hold people. You can't go, right, you now need to spend 3 million on an activation or whatever. But you can set it up so they have the opportunity. And the bit I really liked about that deal is, without any sort of subterfuge or misdirection or tricksiness, just being really smart and going, well, actually, let's just make this a group proposition. And it was we built it around a strategy of, we wanted to position the business as a leading global player. So we had a hook, we related it to the commercial strategy, We structured it so it didn't limit any part of the business. Everybody had the rights to use it. And I suppose that's the unseen side of it. That's the sort of technical behind the scenes where you're like, if you're investing in a property, how do you give the business, and you break down the barriers and give the business the best opportunity to use it. That's what I really liked about that one. And it was really interesting because you're working with Andy Murray and his team, who are, you know, a great team to work with, and you're working out how do we set these things up. Because I like a firm believer that if you got to do these things quickly, but if you structure it right at the start, you save money and you get things done quicker later on. And that's the bit I really liked about being involved in that project.
It's quite beautiful and it all goes to plan. And when people look at a rebrand, generally the public will see the finished article, but they won't see the mechanics in the background.
Yeah.
You're always battling between the internal business logic behind the rebrand and trying to figure out what the public response is going to be and how it actually resonates with the public. And that doesn't always go to plan. And it brings me to the Aberdeen rebrand, where it was devoweled at the time, and that drove some public controversy. What I'd love to hear is, what can you actually say about navigating that rebrand when the public reaction wasn't what you expected?
It was exactly what we expected.
Oh, was it?
Personally, it was exactly what I expected as soon as the idea was presented to me.
You purposefully wanted it to be controversial.
So we didn't. We could chat so much on this. How do I do this quickly? And all of this is out. If you were to do deep research, all these things are answered elsewhere. The interesting thing about the Aberdeen one. So there was two things at play. There was taking a business that had 6 brands and consolidating it to one brand, which is a huge bit of heavy lifting. There was also a name put in before we started the project, which is the name that we went out with as well. So we flagged, pros and cons. We flagged some things early on about it. We did a lot of testing, so we knew the risks. We validated the risks. It was something the business wanted to pursue. So let's look at the upsides and downsides. So what we said on this. What was difficult about it? It was difficult to say. It wasn't a natural word. It wasn't probably a natural devoweling because it didn't say it as precisely as it was. What was the upside of it? It was something new. There was no heritage. You had 2 businesses that had come together. You had 2 different cultures. You needed to make one. It was a clean slate. It was brilliant digitally because you could buy every single, there's this sort of, if you make up a word, it's really easy to get all the social handles, all the domains, immediately.
Especially at the time, everyone was trigger happy about buying domain names.
Well, it's mad when you go we've got a £5 billion business and we can get a domain for 4 figures. We were previous iterations. We were negotiating on 6 and 7 figure domains on other options that we looked at under previous strategy. So there was a lot of upside. I think it's a really interesting one because we went into it fully aware and we worked with Will Folans on the proposition development and the identity. They didn't create the name. They did a fantastic job. We put it out to pitch. We did this really quick. It was all under lockdown. We knew what we were going in for. We knew the risks. But actually it launched well. So with the activation was put around it, we grew D2C awareness by 25% in the first 12 months. And I think I have a hunch that if the challenge with any rebrand is if you do a rebrand, if the rebrand is in line with the business getting cheaper, quicker, better, then it'll probably stick no matter what it is. If it is just a rebrand and there's no change in performance of the business, then it is harder. And I sort of think that, you would have been in a bit of, this probably predates you, but when I think it wasn't Telefonica, it was maybe Hutchison Telecom created the Orange brand. That came up for a lot of slack and it was really widely panned. But actually the business did well, customers bought it, Orange stuck, and I think it's still going there in sort of different markets across the world. I think if the business had been delivering shareholder value to the level they were looking for, and if the products had performed a bit better, then I think the brand would have become more of a footnote. I don't think it was, I think it was problematic, but we'd shown how to make it work. That was our job,
Yeah.
was to make it work, and we did it well. It was the best. The irony is, it was the best implemented rebrand I've ever seen. Every detail was done, and the everything was great, apart from the name was challenging, but business performance will compound those challenges, or they will get you out of it. And we were in neither. We were sort of, it all stayed quite flat after that. So the brand became the focus.
And I suppose you got free UGC before UGC ever existed as well. So
Yeah.
there's that in itself is
The other bit is like the story that's told, because the rebrand happened because they sold the Standard Life brand. There's a throughput on the value. So it's something that had to happen, and a lot of rebrands have to happen for corporate or legal reasons. And I also think you choose what message you lead with on a rebrand. But I think my preference is always to be pretty, to put it all out there, And I think if that had been better understood earlier on, there might have been a more pragmatic reaction, because it is essentially a B2B brand.
yeah.
And certainly lived on as that.
I want to shift gears slightly, so less about the journey and a little bit more
Yeah.
about what you actually know, because 20 years of this gives you perspective that most people in the industry probably don't have yet. So moving towards more quick fire questions,
Yeah.
you've delivered a lot of rebrands across very different organizations. What is the biggest mistake that brands make when they rebrand?
Not knowing why you're doing it
It's a really good one.
and what you need it to do.
A lot of the time it is opinion based and a gut feel based, but the why statement might not actually be very intentional, very substantiated.
Yeah, because like if you need to know what it needs to achieve and how it's going to make your business perform better. And if you know it, you're going to do very well out of it, and it's going to be the best bit of spend you ever put your money behind. If you don't, and like I get, like, there's pragmatism, right? You can have a trigger that is, Abdu doesn't like it, he wants to make his mark, he's moved in. But as long as you connect that to a data point that says, yes, this will help, you can easily find reasons where it can help. So, but I think if you don't have alignment on what it needs to do, why you're doing it up front, it's going to take ages and underperform.
Completely agree. You've also built insight programs, brand tracking, board level scorecards across major businesses. What is the biggest gap you still see in how most businesses measure marketing effectiveness?
Everyone disagrees on attribution. There's no in-house view of that. So there's two things I think you need for these to work, right? You need the Sky example, which I stick with because I've never seen it better. It's where everybody has the same KPI. So if your business has bonuses, all bonuses are paid on that KPI. So if the business doesn't hit it, nobody gets it. I think that's fantastic for focusing effort and for internal conversations on prioritization. So I think everybody needs to have the same overarching KPI, or you need to have full agreement on attribution, because we can use a scorecard to show good and bad. We can have a blended scorecard of all of that. But if we don't know what we're chasing, or what's driving what we think will drive revenue or value for the business, then it's just a lot of data to argue about.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the whole term marketing effectiveness in its own right, a lot of businesses probably don't think about or discuss to begin with, never mind getting to the stage of attribution. But the final three questions for you before we close. What is something in marketing or brand strategy that you think the industry genuinely still hasn't figured out?
I don't think people pay enough time to how they structure and organise their brands and their products and services. I think there's a lot of value to be got from organising it properly, and there's a lot of customer friction that is removed by organising it properly. And I think as we transact more and more online, that friction is really, really meaningful.
And if we did this conversation again in 12 months' time, what do you think would be different then?
I think everybody's going to get a bit scared of AI. Not they're going to get scared by using it. Be not sure about outputs. I think there will be a few scare stories that will paralyze people a bit in the use of it. You know, it'd be hallucinations, quality, something will go out that causes a problem, whether that's a big PR disaster or whether it's an internal one, and then that will wrong foot people again. So the first challenge has been like, how do we use it? What can we do? How does it work in general terms? It's like, oh, how do we actually work with this? It's caused a problem, and the answer is like, again, it's a bit of a down the middle one, isn't it?
Absolutely. And businesses want to be in that race of being early adopters so that they can make the most of the benefit. But then that carries the risk of, if things were to go wrong, if you're knee deep into AI, how much can go wrong for your brand? And that's a question every business wants to ask. And how do you mitigate against that?
Like today we've got price is the 15th of July, right? But today there's like an article going out about Meta struggling with it.
Yeah,
and they've gone, we're going to sack people and move to AI, and now they're publicly saying, well, actually, we're going to bring a bit more people, and that's Meta, and they put 145 billion into it. If they're sort of having a wobble or a rethink,
a small 20, 30 person organization, what do they do?
I think the shame is that would make a small 20, 30 person business even more worried, because it's like, if the people that are making this stuff aren't sure and they're pivoting, what do we do here? It's really difficult for people.
Agreed. And now to the final question, the question that we end every episode with. What is still loading for you right now?
So what is still loading for me? The team piece, right? So I've had a couple of years working on really interesting opportunities. I think I would like to get back into some sort of team environment. I had a really interesting 3-month spell, which I really enjoyed and valued with a small business, and that sort of precipitated us meeting via extended networks. And that's still loading for me. But within that's the bigger question, and I think this one's going to be loading and loading and loading, is I'd say I'm like probably mid-career. So what does the rest of it look like? Because my decisions have been iterative, and I quite like that, and I like to follow opportunities. But yeah, what do we do next in a sort of marketing and sort of creative marketing career? How does that pan out? I don't know. So I think that if we did this a year and a year and a year, that's always going to be there for me.
Stephen, that's a brilliant note to end on. 20 years in FTSE 100 boardrooms, brands that millions of people recognize, and still loading. That's exactly why this show exists. Thank you for being so honest today. That's genuinely all I ask of anyone who sits in this seat, and you've delivered. If something from today's conversation hit home, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. That's how Still Loading grows, and it's the only ask I'll ever make. If anyone wants to continue this conversation with Stephen, you can find him on LinkedIn or on his website. We'll link everything in the show notes. We'll be back next week with another conversation, another first click, another person figuring it out one step at a time. Still loading, just like the rest of us.